Hello everyone. I have a very special piece to share with you again. Today we have a Rexford Aperture with the RDLM module, and this knife is the first piece that Todd put in his RDLM module, and it's also the first Aperture model, which is made in around March of 2018. And before beginning to go into the knife, if you guys watched in the past, I've made quite a few Rexford pieces, and they're all quite special. They're not his regular pieces, they're complex pieces, etc. But this one is, one of the best pieces from Todd, because it not only represents the artistry, the design, but also his innovation, which I'll dig into a little bit later in the video. So I wanted to separate this video into two sections. The first one would be about the Aperture model itself, about the knife itself. And the second part of the video would be about the RDLM module. And I hope I can cover as much information as possible, just to share everything with you guys. So, jumping right in, the blade length of this piece is a 3.68 inch blade with the blade is made from nickel stainless. So Todd uses quite a few knives with shad nickels Damascus, and this one is blackened beautifully. As with Todd's knives, if you notice with other videos, the secondary bevel, so the edge of the knife, is always very small, and it's not mirror polished like some of the other makers, but it is one of the sharpest that I've held. And along with the thinner blade stock, this makes it a perfect user. So Todd's knives aren't just for show, they're very, very good for using. I haven't used this one specifically, but I have had other knives in the past which I did carry, and they are excellent in cutting tasks. Because the blade is thinner and the edge is very well done, very, very grippy. The choil. So in the previous video I made on the singularity with the copper, someone commented that, hey, how do you sharpen this knife without a sharpening choil or a notch? And to me, first of all, to sharpen something like this would best be sent back to the maker. I would only strop it because it doesn't really take any metal off of the blade. And secondly, if you have a sharpening choil, you can take out a lot of the cutting edge out of the knife, whereas you can just start sharpening from here onwards, just to not put like a smile at the end. So if you start sharpening and you do it well, you do it properly, it should look good and for a very long time. And when you cut something, let's say you stick it inside the box and you pull it out, if there is a big choil, it will get stuck. I know there are some people who are able to incorporate that into the design, such as Michael Raymond on his thumb stud piece, where it's just a little notch out, but it doesn't look like a big choil, which to be fair, that looks good on that design, but it wouldn't look good on this design, because if you have a notch, it looks like something's missing there. So that's just in response to someone's comment. And all of Todd's knives that I've seen, they all you know, they all don't have any notches, which, you know, it just works well and it looks good. So I think that for me, I have no problems with that. In this particular piece, he also does not put any jimping on top. Todd usually, you know, his jimping is my favorite out there in the business because it is very fine. So just like this one, very fine and very, very grippy. Doesn't hurt you at all, yet it's got tremendous amount of traction. He does that right. I think he's got that figured out. But you know, in this piece, he doesn't have that, which again, I think it looks very clean on top, and you don't need it in a folding knife, honestly. Next is on the frame. So the frame is obviously a two-piece frame, you know, one on the left, one on the right. But if you notice, it is very airy and is very light. And in fact, this weighs just 4.3 ounces or 122 grams. You know, it fits really well ergonomically. I really love this shape. It just feels so comfortable. Absolutely, you know, any way you want to hold the knife, it just works very, very well. And the frame, the interesting part is normally the frame is connected at the back here with the back spacer, but it's also connected in the front. But in this piece, the frames are actually not connected to each other, or not directly connected, I should say, because it's connected with the RDLM module, which is, you know, in the middle. And if you look inside, the module is actually not the size of this plate. It's actually like the size of a penny, so maybe, you know, around this much. So only that part connects between the two sides, which is very interesting. So, you know, it's almost like it's floating. In a normal knife, you would have a, you know, maybe a stop pin which goes all the way through on both sides, and that holds it in very nicely. But in this piece, you know, there's just something really cool about it, that it's actually semi, you know, not touching each other, you know. So I thought that was quite interesting. And going into the frame pieces itself, so these are Zircuti pieces, quite a few pieces, and Todd counted a total of 136 faces on a Zircuti. So if you look, you know, if you notice, a lot of the makers and even, you know, more famous ones prefer contouring over making facets. And in this case, you know, it's more angular, and there are many different faces. So there's a flat part here, so it all looks very angular, but none of them are sharp. You know, I could put my finger in here very hard and you won't feel a thing. It just feels very nicely rounded, yet the shape looks well defined. So this is something that Todd does really well. I love his work on this because it's not easy. There's a reason why makers like to do things that are contoured and rounded, but because making shapes defined like this is quite difficult, and to get it very consistent, very difficult, because this is, you know, handmade. Todd did start using CNC machines, but you know, these pieces, when you contour all the faces and do the faces, it's done by manual machines, expertly done. And if you look at it, these are actually kind of inlaid into the frame. I'm going to show you right here. So if you can see, about, you know, part of it is inside the frame, and then part of it is sticking out. And if I remove the blade, you can see easier. It's stuck into the frame and it pushes out, which gives a very nice 3D effect. So on both sides, Todd has heat colored it, evenly. So, no matter which angle you look at it, it's always, always beautiful. And I just love that. And, putting this inlaid into the frame with very weird, not weird, but is very beautiful, but very like irregular shapes and fitting it perfectly, I find that to be very pleasing. It's not just sticking something onto a flat frame and screwing it on. That is easy. But if you have to cut into the frame itself, the exact same shape as this piece, there's a lot of risk that you could mess something up and you have to change the shape or throw away the frame. So getting all of these pieces right, it's just marvelous. Marvelous. Very, very lovely. And also, on the frame screws, it's all hidden hardware, which is very neat. So next, let's look at the pocket clip. It's hand rubbed satin finished on the flat with a bead blast finished. And there are a lot of faces. You can see this tiny little face. And this is exactly what makes Todd, a more simple shaped knife still looks beautiful because of these little details. If you try to draw your own knife, like I always say, it'll turn out looking very ugly. I try to do that, it always turns out looking very like it's missing something, and these are the little details that it's missing. They're the little shapes that are missing. Which in here, there are a ton of these little lines. So, on the flats, Todd uses the hand rub satin, and then he uses the bead blast around the frame, which I think is a very beautiful contrast. The back spacer, also hand rubbed with nice holes. You can also see, the centering through the hole, which is really, really cool. Lovely, beautiful touch. Just absolutely wonderful. And you see how the back spacer comes to a point here, and the blade runs right through the middle. Just wonderful. Something that maybe I didn't mention enough, but the proportion of Todd's handles are just perfect. The thickness of it and how he chamfers it just makes it so comfortable to hold in hand. It's not too small, not too big. It's just right. So there's just something about making dimensions just right that sets it apart. I think a lot of knives are thicker than it needs to be. But and something like this is just the right amount for people who value strength but don't want to go full lightweight, yet it's very reasonable size to carry. Just absolutely love it. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up for the Aperture model, or this particular one. I kind of want to talk about the main course of the video, which is the RDLM module. What does RDLM stand for? It's the Rexford drop-in lock module, or the RDLM lock. And just as a preface, I talked to a few knife makers and about locks, and they said that they've seen many people do many different types of locks, and they're all different variations of each other, whether it's a frame lock, liner lock, or back lock. They have something in common, which is not very unique. And at first sight, you would think that this is also part of that, because the way it works is you flip it out, there's a button. Oh, it must be a button lock. You just press it to release the lock and close the knife. But in truth, that's the only similarity with a regular button lock, because a regular button lock is not very strong, actually quite weak, plunger style lock, and it's really hard to tune on a flipper. It's hard to tune the detent just right because it relies on the spring. It's not ideal at all. But this one, if you notice, and I press the button, I need to shake past something. You heard a click, and that's when you get it to release. It is, in a button lock, it would just fall, right? This is different. Plus, the same thing, if it's in a close and you press the button, hey, it's not coming out. If you try to pull it, oh, it's engaged to a detent. Quite interesting. You would expect if you press the button on a button lock, the blade would just fall out. This is not that. Okay, so enough of a teaser, or just to show you a little bit on how functionally it looks different from the outside. Now let's get into why this is really special. The main reason, or the main benefit that Todd made this RDLM module is because the module is completely independent from the frame, meaning that, you can drop in this little module into any frame that, it has the same shape, and it will work. Inside here, Todd has fitted, a detent, the stop pin, the lock face, everything that makes the knife work, all the mechanisms that make a knife work, it's all fit into something that is a size of a penny. So, just to show you an example, a button lock would still need a stop pin, which has to be drilled through both frames, right? And things like that. It has to attach to the frame. The pivot is attached to the frame, and that's just the way it works. But for this module, completely separate from the frame. So the module you don't need a frame, and you can still flip the knife basically, because it's all self-contained in that penny shape. And this is a key benefit because, no matter how you manipulate the lock, if you try to touch the frame, and the frame lock, if you squeeze it too hard and you flip it, the knife won't flip as well. But the lock is completely independent from the frame. Just to give you another idea of what's inside, normally on a frame lock, there's only one lock face, right? When the frame lock moves to lock the knife, there's just one face. If that face is done, it's done. There are 2 lock faces in here, or actually, there's 4 lock faces in here, 2 which are in use, and 2 which are there just in case it starts to wear down. And I find that really, really cool. There are 4 lock faces. Oh, and I forgot to mention that it's not only the detent, whatever, there's also a bearing system inside, something that is the size of a penny. It's just incredible, really, really incredible. The strength of the lock is also, I mentioned, much stronger than a button lock. So the button lock is one of the weakest lock types I've seen that people test. So when people do the test, they would lock in the blade and put weight on the handle this way, just to see how well the lock holds up. Personally, I don't think it's a great representation of what you would use the knife in real life, because you cut the knife in this direction, you don't cut it the other way. But people still like to test locks that way. So when you test locks that way, the way you test it is you see how much pounds of torque the lock can handle. So I've seen Blade HQ do a video in the past on the frame lock, the liner lock, spiders, and different types of button locks and a back lock. And basically, this one can take 879 pounds of torque with parts which are not hardened. And what does 879 pounds of torque mean? This means that it can hold up to around 389 kilograms of weight, which is placed 1 inch away from the pivot. Let me go through that again. So imagine if you hold something close to your arm, like a tennis racket, close to your body, you can hold it for a really long time. But or a baseball bat, but if you stretch your arm out to the fullest length and you try to hold it, it starts to get heavy real fast. So that's, again, the way we measure this. 1 inch away from the pivot, what is the strength or the weight that it can hold? So this one can hold around 389 kilograms, right? Or roughly, if it's the size, length of the handle, around 88 kilograms or 196 pounds. If I remember correctly, a frame lock that was tested was maybe half of that. The liner lock also holds half of that amount of weight. So I guess this is even stronger, even though the lock module is a lot tinier, the size of a penny. It can hold parts which are a lot stronger. Is it the strongest lock ever? No, it's not. A back lock would be stronger than this. But again, that's not really the key selling point. The thing is, this lock module is extremely strong, completely independent from the frame. And one of the best parts, it is modular. The parts are modular. So if you need to fix something, you don't need to do anything to the frame. You just disassemble the frame and you just have the lock module. And if the lock module is completely destroyed, you can just put in a new lock module onto the blade and fit it into the frame, which is much, much different than if you break a frame lock. On a frame lock, if the lock face is worn down, and you basically need a new lock side. You can't just throw in a new lock side. You'd have to make a whole new one, and imagine on a piece like this with very beautifully done, parts. That's gonna be a big pain, right? To cut everything out again, finish it the same way. That's the key benefit, at least for me. One of the key benefits for this, the parts are completely modular. And can't believe I left it this long. How does the action feel? Honestly, on the opening action, it feels like a regular flipper that Todd makes, meaning it has excellent flipping action because the detent is quite strong, flips out really fast, and the closing is very smooth. You can see, yep, it's very quiet on the close, in fact. So I think it's really, really lovely. So yeah, the action feels extremely satisfying, very fast, but very quiet as well. Doesn't hurt your finger at all, perfect jimping, perfect shape, easy one-hand manipulation. The reason I explain all this is because some collectors, even the high-end collectors, they don't really know much detail about this lock. I've even heard one person who has had an RDLM module say it's just like a button lock, so it's not really that special. But to me, I think this is extremely special, and that's the main thing that Todd spent on this build. His time spent went into designing and the making of this module, and it's just incredible of what he can achieve. You know, I think this model is a perfect fit for this model, and what a beautiful model, the Aperture, and it works wonders. Really, really love this piece. Now, what are downsides of this module? The first one is if I have to do self-cleaning, now it would be not as easy as other knives, because when you have high-end folders, you don't really want to take it apart, and the makers don't really want you to take it apart. What some makers, I believe it was RJ Martin, recommended was you kind of spray WD-40 in here and just use the compressed air to blow out everything. You put the WD-40, you just soak the whole thing, flip it a few times, just to make sure that the oil gets all in there, and then you spray it out, all the dirt and gunk comes out. So that's how I usually clean high-end knives. I don't take them apart because I think that will ruin the action, and you don't really need to do that. And second is it works for me. That's how I normally do it. But with this module, it's quite a closed system, so you can kind of try to do the same thing, but what Todd told me was that it doesn't really need maintenance. You might be able to drop an oil in a specific location which has like a tiny gap just to keep the parts lubricated, but really that's the main downside. The second is that if you're anyone like me, which I don't think anyone buying a Rexford is like me, is that the knife is made for actual use. So the way Todd designed the lock face, not only for the RDLM, but for other knives, he designs it such that when you cut things and you turn it around, the lock doesn't move. So the lock is extremely strong like that. So the key downside in that design is actually, if you're someone like me who likes to flip knives very often, that will actually wear down the lock. So the impact that it creates will actually wear down the lock face faster, because it's not made to be like a fidget toy. It's made to be an actual user. So this should last you, 2 to 3 lifetimes. But I have broken a few of Todd's knives before like that, just by flipping the knife a lot, for months and months. It will start to, the lock face will start to wear. But that's because Todd did not design it for that. If you want a knife that fidgets really well in long-term use, it doesn't take or hold, torquing, cutting, twisting as well. The lock would move because it needs to be like flatter, so it would move a lot easier when you have that type of lock geometry. And I did in fact break the RDLM. Yes, I did break the RDLM because I loved it so much, I flipped it so much. And at that time, the lock that was broken, it kind of made the blade jiggle. So because I made the blade jiggle, I just contacted Todd and I had it sent back. And Todd's customer service is one of the best in the world. He separates his services into, I think, either a spa, meaning you kind of clean all the scratchers, versus a warranty or fixing. So mine falls under warranty, and he does that for free, and he sends the knife back for free, which is very, very wonderful of him. And he said, I am the only customer who sends him back knives to fix, because no one else has the same issue. Most of the things that he gets sent back is for spa work, which, every time he does the spa work, he'll make a little mark inside saying that it's been spa'd once or twice, and I believe he takes maximum 3 to 5 spa works, because when you beat blast parts, it'll start to make the shape less defined. But for warranty work, it's fine. He doesn't make any mark because it's just fixing, something that went wrong with the knife. I'm the only guy who sends it back, so I think he was quite happy that I did a very hardcore test by flipping the knife really often for the whole day. And he told me that he was really happy with the module because it would work just as it was designed. So what he did was he took the knife apart, took the screws out, took the knife apart, and he took 5 minutes to fix up the knife completely. When he opened it up, he saw the spring was broken. So there was a spring inside. I think, part of the lock when you press the button. But that spring was torn apart. And he replaced it with a newer one, a thicker one, put it back together within 5 minutes, oiled it, and now it's perfectly clean. So that's just how amazing it is. Imagine if it's a regular frame lock, you'd have to take the whole thing apart. But for this, 5 minutes, done. That's just really, really wonderful. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a story. And I have one extra bonus story for those of you who are interested. Todd hates people who modify his knives because they always go out of spec, they go out of alignment. So one time, a customer sent him back a knife which has been modified. And he lied about it, that it's not modified, but Todd, when he took it apart, he can clearly see that the work is not his. And he said he won't fix the knife because it's been modified. And eventually that person said, okay, yeah, fine, it has been modified. And I don't want the knife anymore. So Todd took the knife out to his backyard, shot it with a gun. Gone. So that's just how much of a perfectionist he is. He wants to do his own work, make sure everything's perfect, no modifications, no nothing, which makes perfect sense when you look at someone who spends so much time doing a craft like this. All right, I think it wraps it up. This is absolutely one of the coolest knives I've ever owned. I really, really enjoy the RDLM, and I can't wait to get the carbon fiber. I'd love to get the carbon fiber piece because that is just really another cool piece. But thank you for watching.